Thank you for joining again, and please join me in welcoming our two guests, both my good friends, Vanessa Hauc and Celinda Lake. There's no doubt that our prospects for climate solutions are on the line in 2020. People say they are concerned, but will they vote on the issue? Will deniers win? We're going to explore the scenarios and how each of us can make a difference in this edition of Let's Talk Climate and Politics. And I think I want to start, Vanessa, why don't you set the stage for us? You're in touch with what's going on.
Thank you, Bob. Hello, everyone. I'm just very happy to be here in this important conversation. We are definitely going through unprecedented times, and we are just 4 months away from the election. And if you think about our country is going through critical times. We are facing this global pandemic that is affecting the United States as the #1 country that have the most cases and death. So this is something that is going to definitely affect the election. We're going through a financial crisis, and we are also going through a lot of unrest on our streets, on our neighborhoods, on our cities. The next president of the United States will have to face all these challenges. He will have to find a strategy to fix the global health crisis that we are facing right now here in the country. And also, he will have to find a way to resolve our economic situation. It will also have to listen to the voices of the people, because I think we have seen in the past couple of weeks that there is a lot of unrest. There is a lot of questioning about reforms. There is a lot of people that want change. And these are issues that our next president will have to face. And they're definitely going to play a role in the next election, Bob.
Great. Hey, Celinda, I want to start off by thanking you for being the backbone of ecoAmerica's research over the years.
Thank
You've
you.
been immensely insightful and helpful. And I know you're doing a lot of work on the election. What's going on? What's going to happen?
Well, first of all, thank you, Bob, so much. And I want to acknowledge Jonathan Voss, who is a partner in our firm and the head of this team. And it is such a privilege to be part of such visionary work. And I encourage all your listeners, although if they're on this podcast, they probably don't need the encouragement, to just go look at the tremendous resources that are posted on your website and available. So in terms of what's going on, obviously there is a good lead for the vice president. People are very upset with the direction of the country and the kind of leadership that Donald Trump is providing. There's a lot of uncertainty around COVID. In general, the issues are merging now, where people think performance on the healthcare aspects of COVID, performance on the economic recovery, and presidential performance in general are starting to be interwoven. And we see the president's job approval at record low numbers, anywhere from 32% approved to 38% approved. That said, there's a lot of uncertainty. There's still over 110 days left to go. There is, I know it's crazy, isn't it? That a lot of uncertainty about vote by mail and how people are going to participate, a lot of uncertainty about having people counted, a lot of uncertainty about making sure that young people who are very climate oriented are motivated to vote, and a lot of uncertainty around this new narrative that the president has started, a new, yet again, divisive narrative about the cultural war. And there is a fundamental difference emerging here between someone who divides the country, who is dog whistle politics, and someone who wants to unite the country and get going and build back better. So we'll see how that choice comes out, but it's very, very high stakes and very unnerving times that we're in.
Vanessa, I didn't congratulate you yet on your new role as anchor of Noticiero Telemundo fin de semana. So congratulations on the weekend anchor role and all your other great work on environment, investigative reporting. You are certainly inspirational and always charming. And, you know, from your role, should we be worried about this election one way or another? What do you think is going to happen? What are the critical things that we should watch?
Well, I think I mean, everything changed with the pandemic, and obviously we all felt it at home with our families and with our lives. And with the election, I mean, we're going to see that the pandemic is going to have a huge effect. If you think about the most important states, like 6 of the states that are tossed up, that we are closely following: Arizona, Florida, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. There is a lot of people that have been affected by the pandemic. There is a lot of people that are Latinos, for example, when you think about the Latino population, that have been greatly affected by the pandemic and by the economic situation. So there's a lot of seniors, when we talk about Florida, that are worried about the situation of COVID-19 here in the state. And they were the ones that support Donald Trump in the 2016 election. That was a great part of the electoral that support the Republican Party, and it has always been like that. So Trump could lose that great group of support, because a lot of them are questioning the way that this administration is handling the crisis, not only in Florida, but also in Arizona and in Texas and others, California, other states that are going through a tough time with the COVID-19 pandemic. So all of this is definitely going to play a role. We are going to see, I think we're going to see some surprises, and Celinda can talk more about that, because of course she's the expert with the research. But we are monitoring very, very closely the role of Latinos in this election, because this is something unprecedented for us, but for this 2020 election, we're going to be 32 million Latinos are going to be eligible to vote. And this can definitely turn the tides in an election. If this population goes and our community go out to the polls and vote, it could have a real impact. So we're very excited about that.
Well, if you look at the way the polls have been going, Gallup, Pew, ecoAmerica's own polling, Yale and George Mason, over the last 3 or 4 years, it seems like the public is becoming more and more concerned about climate change. Our most recent work with Lake Research Partners a few months ago, we were getting numbers over 80% of Americans say they're concerned about climate change, and 54% of them say they're very concerned, which is double of what it was just a few years ago. So, the question is how is climate going to impact this election? Is it going to have an impact? Does that concern turn into voting?
I mean, I absolutely think so, Bob. I think we were having a great momentum in the past couple of months, right before the pandemic. We saw it in the debates. We talked in the last debate in Las Vegas. We talked for 19 minutes about climate, and this had never happened before. And it is not because we wanted to do it; it's because people are asking for it. People are concerned about climate change. We have been seeing the changes in our natural world every day, more and more. We see the fires, the hurricanes. So this is something that is very, very relevant today. Obviously, with the pandemic, all the news and all the attention and all our thinking went through the pandemic. But at the same time, I think this pandemic has shown us 2 things. The number one is that the fragility of our society. I mean, we never thought that we could go through something like that. We never thought that our planet will just stop and we'll have to shelter at home. And the number 2 is the bad relationship that we have with nature. I mean, we are realizing that because of how we are cutting trees, the deforestation, eating the animals, I mean, this pandemic happened exactly because of that. And it have been a lot of scientists have been talking about this. We are creating more spaces where these zoonotic diseases can jump from animals to people. And it is just a result of the broken relationship that we have with our nature. So I think this pandemic at the same time have brought us a moment to reflect and think about what we're doing wrong. And people are looking for change, I mean, to look for sustainable ways to live. And this is also an opportunity for us to stop and think, and climate change is the next big crisis that we're going to have. And I think it's in everybody's mind.
Celinda, you want to jump in on this?
Yeah, I think that climate change will play a big role, and I think that its role could easily be underestimated. One aspect I think of climate change is it will be a major piece of the economic plans that will be debated. And of course, Vice President Biden announcing his economic plan as we're speaking, and the next phase of it is the clean energy climate change piece of that. And Americans really believe that climate change and dealing with climate change has a major impact on our economy, as Vanessa was saying, but also can be a major opportunity in our economy. There's no reason we can't be leaders and should be leaders in this, and we should be doing it with technology and innovation and manufacturing done here in the United States. So it's a very, very much an integral part of an economic agenda. People are also getting much, much more conscious of crisis in terms of pollution and toxins, et cetera. And climate change obviously feeds into that. And as we think of the Latino vote, you have only to look at the dramatic shifts we've seen in the Puerto Rican vote and the vote of people of Puerto Rican origin and in Florida because of the impact on the island of a lot of things related to climate change. And then the last thing is millennials and young voters, Gen Z voters, right now very focused on racial injustice. And of course, there's a major climate and environmental component to that, but police reform, racial justice. But right behind that is still climate change. It's been a major issue for that cohort. It's a major reason why they're pessimistic about the future. And if you want to have record high turnout among young voters, which of course Democrats do and progressives do, you can't do that without talking about climate change and without being aggressive on climate change.
This has been a pretty good week for those of us in the climate space. There have been 3 major pipelines that have been stopped by the courts or by the companies. 2 of the nation's biggest power companies, Florida Power and Light and Dominion, have both announced major investments in renewable energy. And in Dominion's case, they sold off $15 billion worth of natural gas infrastructure. It seems like the core powers here are moving toward climate change. And another one that you might not have heard of is the FERC just changed their rule. They used to say that we got a rule on a power plant, but you can build it while we're waiting the 3 years to go through the approval process. You can build it. Now they're saying you can't build any of those things until after it's approved. But so there's good news. There's bad news, as I think we've all mentioned a little bit here, is that we're entering a wildfire season. We're entering a hurricane season. And the charts that we've been seeing in the past week show the Atlantic Ocean much warmer than usual, which is a big sign for hurricanes, shows the forests much drier than usual. And even right now, just in the past week, the 3rd, 5th, and 8th largest wildfires in the history of Arizona were all burning at the same time. They had more of Arizona, doesn't make the news. So how, with all these good factors and bad factors, do you think that they're going to, do you think we've got enough momentum? If there's a big wildfire season, big flood season, is it going to make a big difference in the election? I'm throwing it out, guys. We're discussing whatever you want.
Well, I think so. What Celinda was mentioning, I think it's very important when we think about specific issues and how they affect the voting attitude of the people. When you talk about the Puerto Ricans in Miami, Celinda, you are absolutely right. They got very, very discouraged by the way this administration handled the crisis with Hurricane Maria. And this was a devastating, I mean, the island was completely devastated. And they needed everything. They needed food, they needed water, they needed electricity. They didn't have anything. Everything broke down because of this humongous storm, Category 5. And the response from the administration was very weak and very unsupportive, and it was very, very sad and very difficult for them. So they will remember when they come and when there is the time to vote. And if you think about it, they are a great part of the Latino vote in Florida specifically. In Florida, there is 20% of the vote is Latino, and a great part is Puerto Rican. So they will remember that and they will vote on that. And when you think about the other issues that are going on, Bob, as you mentioned, the hurricanes that are coming, fires that we just saw in Australia, the fire season that is going to be in California, these are things that are undeniable, and that we cannot just stop and look the other way. This is happening today and it's affecting us all. So I think climate change is something that is more relevant every day. I mean, we are living a climate emergency right now. We are on a crisis, and we will see it more and more, unfortunately. So I think people will definitely start thinking about these issues when they go to cast a vote.
Yeah, I think the other thing is one of the interesting groups of voters that we have identified for this election are called the Guardian women. Among all women voters, 26% say security is their #1 value. They think this election is more important than ever. They think their major goal is to protect themselves and their families, or their communities and their families, I mean. And when you think about this, and we've seen in ecoAmerica's data, that this security and prevention value set, why can't we do more to prevent things? Why can't we increase stability and security? And you can't do that without dealing with climate change. Is very, very powerful to these women voters. So I think you will see women voters really, really motivated by this notion. We can do better. We should be doing more to prevent this. We should be grasping it. The other thing you have is you now have 75% of American voters who think their kids will be worse off than they are. And there are lots of aspects to that: the economy, student loan, housing prices. But a major aspect of that is climate change as well. And people believe that key to the American dream is that your kids are going to be better off than you are, that you work hard to give them a better opportunity. So I think this is, I think the thing that's interesting is if you ask a question like, what's the most important problem out there? And you only get a couple of people that mention climate change, people often interpret this to say the issue isn't that important in this election, but in fact, it's intimately interwoven with everything that we're doing. And people now don't see it as just a separate issue. They see it as tied to the economy, tied to healthcare, tied to community stability and thriving communities, tied to their children's future. And in some ways, we're not talking big enough about climate change, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so, Celinda. And when you talk about mothers, I think that is a great motivation for all of us, and for mothers and for fathers, really. But I work with many groups out there that are really bringing up this message and making mothers aware that I mean, we're voting for the future of our children. And I know that there is nothing greater than the love that we have for our children, and they need to protect them and to make sure that they are going to have all the opportunities that we have, and to see the beauty of this planet and to experience life to the fullest like we have. That's the most important thing for us, and we will do everything to provide that for our children. So I think it is when you talk about climate change, this is a direct threat to the future of our families, and I believe that in this election this is going to play a role.
Well, it's, I just want to thank the people for putting the resources in the chat box. If you go down there, you'll see a lot of things that have been posted. And then, you know, what I hear both of you saying is that there's a lot of connectedness in the world right now, and the issues are connected. COVID, I think, is showing us that science really matters. And if you have a pandemic, it destroys the economy, and it even destroys democracy. We've got this vote by mail, vote at home issue right now, where instead of having 3,000 polling places in a big city, they might have 3, you know, and things like that are really going to be interesting and scary coming up. We've gotten a bunch of questions coming in here, and they're circling around a couple different things, but one of them is swing voters, that the Democrats are going to vote Democratic, the Republicans are going to vote Republican. And I think that right now the numbers are that 35% of Americans self-identify as a Republican. And of those, so if 90% of them say they support Trump, you know, you end up with 32 or 33% of the vote. Uh-oh. Sorry. Gotta turn off my cell phone before this happens. But at any rate, they self-identify as Republicans, and but the question is going to be those people in the middle. And, I think there is some questions about the Latinx vote, Vanessa, that there's some new campaigns that are starting out right now just to focus on the Latinx vote. But what do you think about swing voters, those people in the middle? Where are they going and what do we do with them?
So the key swing vote right now in this election is an independent, non-college educated white voter under 50. And they are very oriented toward the economy. The economy is what holds up Donald Trump among them, but they are also very interested in climate and all the aspects of climate. They are huge believers in green economy and the ability to have an alliance between blue collar workers and environmentalists to create clean technologies, to build clean technologies here in the United States. And they think that if you're going to put solar on your house, you're going to hire someone in your local community to do that. And there's no reason we couldn't be buying solar panels as well. So, and you mentioned how the utility companies are moving really dramatically in that direction because they know it works, they know it sells. So I think this can be a very, very big issue economically as well as environmentally. These are also the people, I come from Montana originally, as you know, Bob. These are people who want to take their kids back to the place that they hunted and fished when they were kids. And those places can be non-existent now with forest fires and drought, etc. So there are lots of aspects of appeal here, but the key swing voter does tend to be more economically oriented, but that doesn't mean they don't care about clean, sustainable economy, clean, sustainable environment, and what they're passing on to their children. We definitely can talk to them very strongly. They also tend to be a little bit more faith-oriented, and I really praise ecoAmerica from the get-go of having always done strong liaison to faith-based community, and I've loved that. It's been one of my favorite parts of ecoAmerica because I think it's so outside the box. The last thing I would say is that one of the things that's quite interesting here is that, and you mentioned it, Bob, being around climate change and being for climate change now is also a question of believing in science. It's a question of being future oriented. It's a question for women in particular being prevention oriented, like can't we prevent any one of these disasters from happening again and again and again? And so there are lots of different angles and people come to this issue, and I think ecoAmerica with its 8 silos has always been very, very innovative in terms of understanding the different ways that people can come to this issue. It's not just in one path, and swing voters are coming in a lot of these alternative ways to this issue.
Celinda, could I ask you something?
Sure.
Where are these voters located, and what percentage of the whole voting bloc they are?
Yeah, really good question. So 2/3 of the voters are non-college educated, 60% plus are non-college educated, including a little over half of younger voters. We think of younger voters as all being students. It's not true. They are more students, but it's not true by any manner of means. And then in terms of the white non-college educated under 50 voters who are independents, that's the other key factor. They tend to make up a critical 10-12% of the electorate, and that's the margin of victory here right now. The other interesting thing about these voters is they're very populist. They really believe that the powerful special interests have too much say, and they're very suspicious of, say, oil and gas companies and the power that they wield in terms of lobbyists, in terms of determining regulations. So there is a kind of populism, which of course Trump practices a lot, and it's one of the ways he appealed to these voters. There's a kind of populism here and a conversation about the rigging of the system that is very, very appealing to these voters.
Vanessa, did you want to say something? Or?
Yes, I wanted to, very interesting information. Thank you, Celinda. I'm taking notes here for the news. So when you talk about the Latino vote, there is a lot of people that are also undecided, and I think it has to do with the fact that both parties, the Democratic and the Republican, they need to do a better job, really focusing on the Latino vote and what they need. Um, for example, when you think about Republicans right now, I mean, the past 3 years have been really, really difficult for our community. I mean, not only we have had an anti-immigrant agenda, but also we have seen family separations and kids in cages, and really it's been devastating for our community. At the same time, Latinos are the population and the community in the country that have the highest numbers of COVID-19 cases, and also the highest numbers on unemployment. And they are essential workers. So many times the problem is that they have to go to work, and we reported every time in Telemundo News that we see that many Latinos have contracted COVID because they are the supermarkets people, they are the people that go and pick up the fruits and vegetables. They are also nurses and doctors that are in the front lines. So they are contracting COVID. So they are very, very affected by what is going on. And when you think about it in the Democratic Party, although a great part of the Latino population supports the Democratic Party, well, according to a lot of latest polls, when you talk about Biden, he still has some trouble. He still underperforms when you talk about the Latino community. He has right now in a couple of polls that I was reading this morning, 59% of the Latino vote. But in 2016, Hillary Clinton had 66%, and Obama in 2012 had 71%. So there is still a great need for both parties to really address this community, especially if you think about that we are 32 million eligible voters, and every year this number is going to raise. So it's a good moment to really think about the needs and how really to conquer the Latino vote.
What are the 3 or 2 or 4 best messages? What would you say to your Latinx friends that might get them to shift their voting one way or another?
Well, when you talk about Latinos, one of the things, Bob, that is very important for Latinos, and we saw it in Nevada specifically, is climate change. Because, as you know, minorities, among them Latinos, are disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate. Not only because a lot of a great part of our community work outside in landscaping, in agriculture, but also because we live in places that maybe we don't have the resources to rebuild when a hurricane comes or where fire strikes. So they are aware that they are in the front line and they are deeply affected. So this is an issue that is important for them. The economy, of course, is something that is very important. We, as immigrants, we came to this country to work hard and to provide for our children. And what we want is the same things that you want. You know, I mean, we want to give them opportunities to study, to do the best, to be the best. And so the economy is extremely important for us to have the opportunities to work. And of course, immigration too. I mean, we all know somebody that is probably struggling because their situation is not they don't have a citizenship, or they don't have the opportunity to vote, or so this is something that it touches our community in a very strong place. When you talk about the Dreamers, for example, almost 1 million students that came here when they were children, and they I mean, this is the only country that they know, and imagine what they are going through when this administration is trying to just cancel their status and send them back to a country that they don't even know, because many of them don't even speak Spanish. So, I mean, we need to definitely focus on the things that are important for Latinos, and this is something that is something that definitely the Democrats and the Republicans will have to think about it, hopefully for this election, because we are going to be key.
It's interesting, you know, even American citizens like Puerto Ricans are afraid of what the administration is doing to Latinx people in so many different ways. And you know, there's a lot of difference. There's not just one Latinx group. There's, people from Central America, people from the Caribbean and Puerto Rico, and they're different. And there's differences between age groups and how long they've spent in America. And I know, Celinda, you just done some fantastic research on Puerto Rican Hispanics. You want to pull out a few little tidbits from that? I think you're doing a briefing on that on the 22nd of July, but maybe can you shed a little early light on that for us?
Absolutely. And Bob, thank you so much for, you were really catalytic to getting that project going. So it's really a key vote. So what happens is many Puerto Rican voters who have a lot of high participation rates when they're living on the island come to Florida and plummet in their participation rates. And so we were trying to figure out, what do we do about that? How can we overcome that? And there were three things that turned out. One thing that came out of the research was, in Puerto Rico, voting is more of a community and family activity. And so people were really wanting to create that same spirit again. And of course, that's even more challenging in the COVID environment, because you're not voting in person. You're not necessarily, it's not a holiday. You're not going with your family to vote. So that is point number one. Point number two is the whole vote by mail process, very unfamiliar and not necessarily intuitive. People said, okay, I'm going to vote by mail. How am I going to get my ballot? Where do I send it afterwards? Do I drop it in the mailbox? Do I give it to my mail carrier? Can I give them my ballot and my husband's ballot, whatever? So if you live in a high vote by mail state like Oregon or California, you know how this process works. If you're just new to those states, or you live in a state that has traditionally not been very friendly to vote by mail, the process is not intuitive. And then I think for this call, what was the most exciting finding, and this was for Puerto Ricans, both new residents into Florida and long-term residents to Florida, under 40, they were absolutely obsessed with the climate change issue. That was not something we started out to find. This was a study about Puerto Rican Americans and just trying to figure out what would motivate people to vote. We had no desire to find climate change as the number one issue. They tied it, of course, and Vanessa was eloquent on it, to the hurricanes. They also thought that Donald Trump was incredibly disrespectful to the community. And Vanessa, you referred to this as well, and to Puerto Rican people around this issue. And so climate change was a very intense motivator. And I don't think a lot of the groups had particularly identified that in the past as a way of motivating young Puerto Ricans to go vote.
Vanessa, we got to hear what you're going to say about this.
I think she's absolutely right. Yes, Celinda, I was starting to read the studies because Bob sent it to me this morning. Thank you, Bob. And they are amazing. I mean, full of information, and really they paint a picture of our community and what's important for us. So, and what is happening with Puerto Ricans, you can see it also in other states, because even though, as you mentioned, Bob, our community is very diverse. I mean, we have a great deal of the population here in the United States. The Latino population is from Mexico, more than 60%. But yeah, we have Puerto Ricans in New York, and in Florida, we have Cubans, and we have a lot of Venezuelans and Colombians and Peruvians and Central Americans. So it's not a monolith, but at the same time, at the bottom of everything, at the base, we care for the same things. The things that are affecting our community, the things that are affecting our families, and the reason why we came here. I mean, we came here to look for a better life, for better opportunities for our children, and that's what we're looking for when we think about a candidate. At the same time, I think it's something very interesting that I was reading about the study, Celinda, that I thought it was just brilliant, is that you have to think about the ages and when these immigrants came to this country. Of course, I mean, if you just arrive, you don't know, you're not familiar with the voting process and with politics here. But if you're here for 20 years, you know exactly, and you probably identify with the Republican or with the Democratic Party. So the story is completely different. We have here in Florida, a great part of the population is from Cuba, and a lot of them came a long time ago. So, or they are second or third generation of Cubans. So they have different attitudes when they go to the polls. It's I think it's fascinating to see, and I can wait for election night to see the results. Here from my side as a journalist that I work in Telemundo Network, what we do is really bring this message across to our audience and inform them, okay, this is the proposal of this candidate and this is the proposal of this candidate, and try to really make it a very, very important piece of the conversation, because we know that informed and educated voters are going to definitely make a difference, and we want our community to be part of this process. So I think it's going to be very interesting, this 2020 election, and critical for all of us and for the planet itself.
Let's go to Florida for a minute. Florida has 29 electoral college votes. You only need 270 to win. Florida all by itself has the fifth largest amount of electoral college members of any state in the nation. And you get 10, 11, 12% of the way to the presidency by getting Florida. Whichever way Florida goes is probably the way the election's going to go, because the states that are bigger, like Texas, New York, California, you kind of know which direction those states are going to go. So if you want a state that's in play, that's all the statewide elections and federal elections in Florida are decided by like less than 1% of the vote. It's scary. So how do we see things playing out in Florida? Is climate a bigger impact there because of Maria, because of, Vanessa, you're in Miami, my daughter's in Miami. We all know what driving down the roads in the middle of the day through water is like nowadays. Is that, what's going on with Florida?
I think it's going to be a key. Definitely it's going to be a key state. This is a state that Biden and at the same time Trump cannot risk to lose. They need to win both of them, Florida, in order to win the election. It's going to be critical. When you talk about Florida, I think, for example, this part of the population, the seniors that used to support Donald Trump and that supported Donald Trump in 2016. I was reading this morning a couple of articles about them, and what they say is that there has been a sentiment of despair, and some of them even regret voting for Trump, because they believe that they were happy to put an entrepreneur, somebody that knew about economics in the White House that was going to change the discourse in Washington. And what happened is that for many of them, he failed. And so this voting bloc is 21% of the voting in Florida that could go to Biden. And when you think about the latest polls, it's tied, or even sometimes Biden is up a couple of points. So this could be an opportunity for him to really turn the tides in Florida. When you talk about the Latino population, it's 20% in Florida. So definitely also they are going to be key. But what you mentioned, Bob, in Miami, I used to live in Miami. I just moved a couple of months ago. And it was because of that, because we will see that before 15 years ago, when I moved there, we have king tide, and then we have floodings on the streets. But lately, it was every year, and it was not even king tide or hurricane season or storm or anything. We had flooding every day, and our cars were flooded in the basement, and so in the parking lot. So really, this is something that Floridians are seeing more and more, and it's part of the reality. It's right there happening in their backyards. So I think it's going to be a key issue, and as year progresses and we see more the impacts of climate change, this is something that is going to be critical at the time of voting. I hope it will be this election that we see how climate is going to really move the balance. But we have to wait and see.
I think, well, we have a couple interesting questions here. Alan Wedgwood, hi Alan, wherever you are out there. He's asking how conservative and Latinx people are motivated by religion. Is the faith is abortion an issue with them? So if you take the Latino community, what about faith and abortion?
Faith is very important for the Latino community. Very, very, I mean, extremely important. Most of the population in our countries of origins are Catholic. We were raised Catholics. I was raised Catholic. So this is a very important issue. And when we come here to the States, this is something that we bring with us because it's part of us. It's on our DNA. You know, we are spiritual people and we are connected to faith and to the belief that there is something greater that is taking care of us. Abortion, I think, is something that is also very important for our community. We respect life, and I think this is probably going to play a role. And at the same time, you see a lot of Latinx that are very progressive and believe in the rights of the women to choose. I mean, I think this is very important. So we will see how it goes in this election. But definitely those are two issues that are going to be on the table at the time of deciding.
Yeah, I think Vanessa's right about faith being very important. And of course, Donald Trump is trying to tap into that. But I think one of the things that people remember the most and found most offensive was when he actually cleared out the protesters to go to the church and then held up the Bible. And it was very clear that was not a familiar activity for him. And so people really don't like faith. It's a part of community, it's a part of family, but people don't like it misused. What we have polled on the abortion issue in the Latino community in Florida, and a lot of people feel like this is such an important issue, such an important family and personal decision that you cannot make it for someone else. And certainly politicians should not make it because of their political agenda. We also found that the Latino community very, very supportive of birth control. And of course, the administration just moved again to try to get ACA not to cover birth control, not to cover contraception, not to have employer insurance plans cover contraception. And that's just really out of step. People feel like, no, you're butting in. These are family decisions. We need all of the choices. You cannot make this choice for someone else unless you have walked in their shoes. And one of the things that really resonated in the Latino community was the statement, everyone should have the right to choose if and when to have children. And so that it really broadens this debate out. And one thing that the Latino community finds very, very powerful is the notion that we should be taking better care of children, and we should be having good schools. We should not have kids going home. We should not be separating families at the border, and we want to ensure a good future for our children, and that includes climate change. Climate change is a critical component of that. So the Latinx community, one of the things I love working in the community, and Vanessa, as a commentator, you always bring this to your shows. I love watching you. Things are interconnected and much bigger. The Latino community is not as receptive to kind of dog whistle wedge politics the way certain aspects of the Anglo community are. And it's really very refreshing, frankly, that they're not. They're very thoughtful voters who see the interconnectedness of all of these things.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you both for being candid on some sensitive subjects here. We're all just trying to figure out how we can make a difference in this this upcoming election. And there's the climate change and there's other stuff, but you note that some of the same demographics that are an issue for climate change, which are older white males, which by the way just dropped under 50% in support for Donald Trump for the first time ever. The people that are a problem for climate change are a problem for other things that we have going on in this country as well. And a lot of them are deniers. So we've got a few questions here from people asking about climate deniers, and maybe let's just try to tie all that string together by saying, what do you think about climate deniers? Has that changed in like the last 4 years? Is it a big issue, or does everybody get climate change right now and we just need to get them the right information?
So there are three things that I think, and we know a lot about this thanks to the time series from ecoAmerica. And I really, really encourage people who are interested in this question to look at those trends because, and Bob, I really commend you and your team for putting together the resources along with Yale so that we know a lot about this. But there are three things that we know. We know, number one, that the percentage of climate deniers is at a record low. Number two, and there's just so many forest fires, so many floods, so many hurricanes, so many record high days. I mean, one of the best testing things we found in your research was people said, yeah, temperatures go up and down, but when you've got 90% of the record number of days in the last couple of years, something is going on. The second thing we know is that scientists are in record high regard, despite being attacked and a lot of people denying them in COVID. And I think it'll be very interesting to see how these trends have shift. I predict they will shift in our favor because people were getting a little cynical about scientists, but now Fauci and other people, public health officials and scientists are like the top trusted people out there. And then the third thing I'd say, and the most exciting, it doesn't matter whether you think that climate change is human caused or just cyclical. People think that it is now getting threatening enough that we need to do something about it no matter what it's caused. For a long time, we had this divide of human caused or cyclical, and it really determined your attitudes. The good news now is people say we need to do something no matter what its origin. And that's, I think, a breakthrough moment.
That's wonderful research, Linda. I love listening to you. It's so amazing. So yeah, I mean, when I see it in the news, I mean, I've been covering climate issues for the past 15 years, and before it was even difficult for us because of all the climate deniers and even in the journalists. I mean, you had the idea that, of course, you have to give equal time to both sides. But now that is non-existent anymore, and I'm so happy because, I mean, there is consensus, and there is few times in history when there is such a great consensus in science. I mean, 97% of the scientists agrees that climate change is man-made and that is happening today. And beyond that, I think what is happening is that people are seeing it. I mean, climate change is not a distant phenomenon that we were going to experience maybe in 30 years, or we were not going to see. We're seeing it today. I mean, we're seeing it in the fires, in the droughts that are happening in Central America. We're seeing it in the hurricane seasons. So I have a great mentor of mine, a great friend that used to tell me, Mother Nature will have the loudest voice in this debate. And I think it's definitely the case,
Right.
There is no more space for deniers. I mean, we have to really focus and support science, and we see it right now with the pandemic. I mean, you are absolutely right, Celinda. I mean, this is when you do polls in the media, you see that the most trusted people are the scientists and the experts, and not the politicians or other groups of people, but the science is something that we believe and we support. And it's the way that it should be.
Well, most of the people on this call are on this call because they're worried about climate change and they want the election to go whatever direction is going to save us from the bad consequences of our current policies. And now those, you can maybe convince people by talking to them about climate change, but you can also just convince them to vote for the candidate that will address climate change, whether or not you use climate change arguments. So if you want to advance climate directly or indirectly in this election, what kind of advice would you give to all the people that are listening to this webcast?
Well, I'll start. I would say, first of all, vote and register. And we really are going to have a struggle. And then we have to fight to protect the vote because there are an array of adversaries out there trying to limit the way people can vote, trying to disqualify ballots, and we're going to have to fight for every ballot. Secondly, I would say that we haven't talked that much about it, but one of the groups of voters that is coming into play is seniors as well. We're doing record well with seniors, better than we've done since 2008. And seniors in places like Florida are very concerned about climate change. So it's a new senior in town. It's the baby boomer senior, and they are very concerned about the environment. And so I think, as we've talked a lot about younger voters who are critical, but also persuading seniors. And then the interesting thing is, good news, bad news, with the inability to campaign in traditional ways, we're all looking for non-traditional ways to campaign, and relational organizing, providing information to friends and family, your church group list, your book club list. Those guardian moms, I saw a question come through earlier in the chat. They are, who do they listen to? Well, most of them are married to Trump supporting husbands. Now they do listen to their kids, and their kids usually have different views. They also, though, listen to other women. They want information, but they're very short of time in terms of getting information on their own. And they tend to think of their husbands as having more information than they do. So in all of our lists of women voters, it's very, very important to get information out about people's voting records and do the research and share multiple sources. And then I'll turn it to Vanessa, who's far more expert. First of all, everybody Latino and Anglo should listen to Vanessa. But yeah, she knows
I love you, Celinda.
Latino voters. But Latinos are very, very interested in, they're paying a lot of attention, as are African-American voters. And we need to make sure that we're getting information out, because you're right, we do have a little bit of an enthusiasm issue in the Latino community. The Latino community has been hardest hit by the economy and really hard hit by COVID. It's really quite frightening and disturbing how many of because so many essential workers are Latino, because Latinos have gone back to work faster, how the community is affected. And getting information to the community is really, really important. I'll turn it to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Celinda. I think you said it all. I mean, really, information is the key. And that's why I feel my job is so important, especially at these times, we make sure to go above and beyond to really inform and put these agendas in front of our community for them to decide who is the best vote, who is really the person that is going to better represent their interests, and the interests of their families and the communities and of the planet, because at the end of the day, a lot of what the politicians do is going to impact deeply the future of our planet. And not only in the general election, but also in the local election. This is something very, very important for us, because they make governors and mayors and representatives, they make very, very important decisions that impact our lives every day. So I think this is a critical election, and it's so important that we all get involved. As you mentioned, Celinda, talking to our families, to our parents, to our friends, I mean, really, many people maybe are not so interested, or maybe don't have the time to research the information, but bring it up in conversation and put it in perspective. I mean, the person that is going to be in the White House could really have an amazing impact in the future of the well-being of our planet, and therefore of our well-being and our future. I mean, if you think about it, scientists have given us now 10 years to turn the tides and really cut the emissions to half. And then by 2050, we need to be zero emissions. For this, we need a monumental effort. I mean, this is going to take a huge effort from every industry in our country. So we need a leader that is on board and that is willing to really make the changes that we need.
Yeah, when you take a look at what advice I would give people, I think the first thing that you said, Celinda, which is, make sure you're registered, make sure you vote, and make sure you talk to everybody. And that's the first thing that you should say to them, because if they don't take that step, nothing else makes any difference, right? So, and then figure out the vote by mail, figure out the vote at home. I know a lot of us are working on that. But the second thing that I would say is, figure out what you care about. Just write like 1, 2, 3. What are the top 3 things I care about? And usually the positions between these two candidates are so stark, it's obvious. I personally don't understand why any Latinx person I just don't. I mean, you know, with the walls and the way it's spooky. It's scary if you care about democracy in this country. And but at any rate, if you write down your 3 issues and then say, okay, you know, look at some unbiased news source and say, if I really care about these 3 things, who's going to take me backwards? Who's going to take me forward? And then make a decision based on an honest assessment of yourself and what you really care about and what you want to have happen. We've only got about a minute or 2 left. Does anybody want to make a closing comment? I'm going to thank you and all that stuff, but anything else you want to say?
No, but thank you all. This has been amazing, and it's always amazing being with Vanessa. Thank you so much. And Bob, thank you again to ecoAmerica for providing such a resource for people.
Okay.
Well, I want to say thank you too. I mean, it's wonderful to have this conversation. Celinda, thank you for your research. It's amazing, and please send it my way because I'm so interested in seeing it. And thank you, Bob, and maybe and Jess and Mark, everybody that is working on these talks, climate talks that are so important. And thank you for bringing us in this conversation, Bob.
All right. I want to thank both of you a whole lot. I mean, you're big influences on my life and on our work. And then I do want to thank the ecoAmerica team, a lot of them behind the scenes right now, driving this webinar and setting all this stuff up. It doesn't go smoothly because I get to sit here and talk. It goes smoothly because they're actually people that make things happen at ecoAmerica. So, but you know, let's head into this election season. We've got, what was it, 110 days till the election and 100 days more till the next, you know, next president takes office. And let's get this country moving in the right direction. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh.